Hey everybody, Bacon here, and I'd like to talk to you about the tournament format suggested by RDU, which he calls Strike Format, and has been recently adopted by the website Good Gaming. So just a few days ago, I had an opportunity to try the Strike Format on Good Gaming's first open tournament using the format, and I managed to get all the way through the tournament and win it. So I just wanted to let you guys know what I think about the format, some pros and cons that it has, and just my general thoughts on how to play the strategy of the format and what I think about it overall. So, for any of you who haven't seen it before, the strike format is it's a variation on Hearthstone tournament formats where you don't just ban a class, you ban specific matchups. So to start off, each player chooses 3 decks and locks in what they're using, and then they take turns to ban those specific matchups. So player one will ban, for example, player one may ban Druid versus Shaman. So I bring Druid, I don't want to play versus your Shaman, so I just ban that matchup. Then player two gets 2 bans in response, so they might ban Mage versus Warlock, or they might ban Mage versus Warrior if they're running a freeze mage, something like that. And they get 2 bans, and then it goes back to the first person who gets their second ban. So this format, it adds a lot more depth to the pick ban period of a tournament, as opposed to the general like conquest format of choosing one class and banning it. So it allows you to do a bit more complex things than just saying, well, I'm going to ban the tier 1 deck of Shaman because it can steal wins off anything. Now, if you want to go for a more simplistic approach to it, you could still say, just like, I'm going to ban as many of their Shaman matchups as I can. That way, the only Shaman matchup they get to play is the mirror matchup where we do Shaman versus Shaman. But if you don't go for a strategy like that, you get a lot more opportunities to go for like specific like niche bans, and because of that, you sort of get a greater deck diversity in the tournament by being able to eliminate specific bad matchups. Now, a bit ago, I mentioned the freeze mage matchup. And Freeze Mage is probably the perfect example of this because it's a deck that is extremely polarizing. It does very well against the things it does well against. It does really poorly against the things it doesn't. So you can use Freeze Mage in this format to clean up Shamans and Warlocks, specifically Zoo Warlocks, but also Reno Lock. You've got a pretty good matchup there as well. And you would do that by specifically banning out the matchups for Mage that are really bad for you. So you would ban out your Mage versus their Warrior. You would ban out your Mage versus their Druid, things like that. It depends on what they have in their lineup, but it allows you to bring decks that are a bit more niche, a bit more situational. So this creates a greater deck diversity than you would see on the ladder, where you have no control over what you're going to run into. The other thing I really loved about the format is that there is a certain level of predictability that you don't get in Conquest. So in Conquest, every time you queue up a match, it's a random blind pick. Like, you don't know what they're going to be playing, they don't know what I'm going to be playing. We just choose a deck and go. And this creates a situation where if you get unlucky in the order you pick your decks, you can be immediately put in a bad situation. Like, if in the first game you queue up into a bad matchup, then you're already down 0-1, and it's not necessarily because you played poorly. It's not because you designed your lineup poorly. It's just because you managed to queue into a poor matchup. So that's always been one of the big issues people have with Conquest, and this solves that by, once the bans are done, the Good Gaming, they have like a Strike app which calculates the matchups for you, and then after the bans are all done, it just gives you 5 matches. You play them out in order, and like, okay, this one's going to be Shaman versus Warlock, or game 2 is going to be Druid versus Mage, stuff like that. So you don't have that situation of, oh crap, I queued my decks in the wrong order, I guess I'm going to lose. So it does remove that variance and adds a lot more predictability to the pick order of it. Now, some negative things I found about the format is this is actually in relation to my second point, but it really reduces the relatability of the tournament to your average player. So like I mentioned, it adds more deck diversity that you don't see on the ladder, but as a virtue of that, it automatically becomes less relatable to players watching the tournament rather than competing in it. So a lot of casual or not necessarily casual, but a lot of players end up net decking tournament decks and using them on the ladder. But if you do that from a strike format tournament, you're probably not going to find very much success because on the ladder you can't target specific matchups. On the ladder you can't ban out bad matchups. So I personally don't think that Freeze Mage is a great choice for the ladder right now. But in strike format you can make it work. You can design a ban strategy that makes it work. This is a little deceptive to casual players because they just think, oh well, these people are really good, therefore I should use their decks. But it's not relatable anymore. Whereas Conquest is very relatable, where you just take decks that are generally considered good and use them on the ladder. So you lose quite a bit there by alienating the casual viewer base. And the other issue with this is that for people trying to break into the competitive scene, it becomes very difficult to practice for a strike format tournament because you can't use the ladder. If you don't have an extensive friend list of high legend ranking players who are willing to practice with you, then you can't really use the ladder to prepare for something like this because it is a very niche type of tournament. So you either have to do a lot of theory crafting and then just trust that you can play these specifically teched decks well, or you have to tank a lot of ladder ranks just to brute force your way into the matchups you want to play and do it that way, or you just have to deal with the fact that you can't really practice as well as someone like RDU who designed the format and has that big list of people to practice with. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for new players to enter the competitive scene because they have an inherent disadvantage due to not having a lot of practice partners. And the last negative thing I found about the event is I was thinking about how you could translate this into the Hearthstone World Championship if they wanted to adopt it, and it would be very difficult to actually scale this onto a tournament of that size because the banning format would be very confusing for players, for viewers, unless it was specifically explained to them, and they also highlighted the strategy that went into creating the picks and bans and deck lineups and all that stuff. So they would have to spend a considerable amount of time on each match explaining how the picks and bans worked, explaining what the casters thought for what strategies were going on and stuff like that. And that could be interesting, but it adds a lot of bulk to it. It makes it very very difficult to run a time efficient tournament, considering that a lot of the large Hearthstone tournaments take a lot of time already. You're already spending all day doing it, but if you add into it a 5 or 10 minute pick ban period, it gets to be that adds 5 to 10 minutes for each match, and it ends up being a very long day. So those are sort of the negative things I found about the tournament. Something a bit neutral that I noted was that when I was designing my class lineup for the event, I thought that I thought that there'd be an inherent advantage given to classes that can go to, two distinct different ways when you're playing them. So, for example, in my lineup, I took Warlock and Mage because both of those classes have like two distinct archetypes. So you can either be playing Zoo or Reno Lock, and you could be playing Tempo Mage or Freeze Mage. Right, so that adds a lot of ambiguity to the ban stages for your opponent, and make it so that you have an inherent information advantage. Now, because of that, classes that can generally only go one way in their strategies are an inherent disadvantage. For example, you pretty much know what you're going to be running into when you see a shaman or a druid, stuff like that. So that's sort of like a neutral point. Like, ideally, we'll be in a meta at some point where every class has multiple viable archetypes. But at the moment, there are only some that can do that. So that gives it gives a bit of an unfair advantage towards specialists of those type of classes. Like, I've always enjoyed playing both Freeze and Tempo Mage. So I really liked this aspect of the tournament because it let me play a bit of mind games with my opponents. So my final thoughts on the whole thing and just my general summed up perspective on it was, I think that Strike Format is a great tournament from the player perspective because it lets you demonstrate a great deal of skill in lineup and deck choices. When you take into account the viewer perspective and the burden that it would put on production for a large event, I'm not sure if it's really worth it. So yeah, I think it's a really cool initiative from RDU and the website Good Gaming, but I'm just not quite sure how far it'll be able to go. Having said that, I'm going to continue to play in the tournaments because I found it really fun. So those are my thoughts on the tournament format. Let me know in the comments what you think. We'll see you guys next time.